Happy Wednesday, everybody. Mr. Regan here. I hope everybody's doing well. Today, we're obviously going to be talking about our Wednesday lesson. A few things, housekeeping before we get going. Number one, I have changed kind of the names for the lessons to help you guys keep organized. Monday is now lesson 12. Tuesday is now lesson 13, and today is lesson 14. Had a lot of emails about that. Hey, Mr. Regan, I'm a little confused. Where is our lesson? That kind of stuff. Do we do the same lesson as before? So I want to praise you guys for reaching out to me and saying, hey, this is confusing. Hopefully this makes things easier to follow. I apologize for that. And before I jump into even more detail about today's lessons, the last thing I want to say is you guys have been doing an awesome job. I know this has been a transition. I know I say this a lot. E-learning is different for everyone, and I want to thank those of you who keep in contact with me and your teachers about this stuff. Not only are you helping yourselves, but you're helping us kind of figure out how to make this work. Okay, when you guys communicate with us, we're able to make things better for you, okay? And at the end of the day, and I need you all to remember this, okay? We got your backs with this stuff. There are times where I'm going to hold firm to things and say, hey, I'm challenging you here. I want to see how you figure this stuff out. And there are going to be times where I say, okay, this needs to change. Let's fix it. And at the end of all this, I want you to remember that we're going to figure things out no matter what. We think you're awesome. We know you're working hard. And at the end of the day, if you reach out, we're going to make this work. Okay, so if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have needs, please reach out. Otherwise, let's dive into today. Today, we're going to be creating our next body paragraph, and we're going to be identifying counter arguments to our claim and evidence, and we're going to be countering those arguments. So for those of us who are very argumentative when it comes to things, who are like to challenge our parents on stuff, or who like to listen to an authority figure, teacher, parent, or anyone else and think to themselves, why might what they're saying be wrong or incorrect, or how can I challenge that? Today is going to be your day, okay? If you've clicked on lesson 14, awesome. It's going to take you obviously into here. And if you're watching this video, obviously you've made it down to the guide section. So make sure, number one, you went through the prep and pulled up your document. Today you're watching the video. We're going to look at the resource. Today, the focus of our paragraph is to create our second body paragraph about our GMO debate. And we're going to be writing counter arguments to the claim and evidence that we had in the previous paragraph. So we're going to be arguing against the evidence and claim we think is the best. And we're going to do that by answering these two questions, not three. And we're going to be using information from our previous lessons to help. Obviously, the reminder, we're writing a paragraph. Make sure you have those important things. So let's go ahead and look at the two questions we're going to be answering. What would people say to argue against some of the evidence you provided in your previous paragraph? This is key, this underlined section, the evidence. A lot of people like to argue against the claim, but what we're looking to do is argue against the evidence, okay? Whenever we look at a debate, okay, anyone can argue against the opposite point, but when we argue against the evidence, we're able to find flaws or mistakes or things that maybe don't make sense, so that we, number one, can make sense of it on our own and have our own thoughts about it. And number two, identify where people might pull out things that is wrong with our claims or the things that we think are correct. Again, helping us to self-evaluate. Okay, so we're going to look at that and then explain why those arguments against your evidence are weak, wrong, or flawed when thinking about the GMO debate, okay? So again, we're going to dive into the resource here. I know. We've talked about paragraph 1 with our intro, paragraph 2 with our body, and now we're into paragraph 3, or our second body paragraph. I know that many of you have reached out for help. I want to praise you again for that. Make sure if you need help with that, this one today, you're reaching out for it as well. All right, so we're going to dive back into our argument that I have as our example, the Bears versus the Packers. I know it's challenging to say, okay, here's one example about a completely different topic versus GMOs, but remember, this is where I'm challenging you. How can I take this example that my teacher's given me and apply it to the GMO debate, okay? So let's go ahead and look at the first question. What would people say to argue against the evidence provided in the previous paragraph? So this is where I have to look at my evidence and say, okay, where might people look at this and have arguments against why this proves the Packers are better than the Bears. Okay, again, I'm arguing against this evidence, not against the idea that the Packers are better than the Bears. Okay, so I pulled out a few examples, and hopefully we can pick apart why these don't make sense, why we think they're flawed, or how to argue against them. So one of them was that the Bears made 32 playoff appearances. For those of you who know anything about football, just because you make the playoffs doesn't mean you're going to win a trophy, doesn't mean you're going to win the Super Bowl, doesn't mean you're going to be the best team that year, let alone better than another team. On top of that, if you make the playoffs, it doesn't mean you're not going to lose to, say, the Bears, okay? So that is one flaw in that evidence. So the 32 playoff appearances for the Packers doesn't mean they won a trophy, have a strong team that year, or won the Super Bowl. Again, just because you make the playoffs doesn't mean you're going to win, okay? We know that the Packers beat the Bears 99 times, but the Bears beat the Packers 95. So someone might look at that and say, hey, just because there's this difference doesn't mean that difference between the two isn't almost the same. They're almost identical. They're 4 games away. That's not a huge difference. Okay. And though there's a difference, it's not big enough to say for sure, like, hey, Bears are better than the Packers. Okay. Or the Packers are better than the Bears. Last but not least, there was one other evidence about how the Packers have the number 1 ranked attendance for games. More Packers fans show up for those sort of games. And I'm going to kind of allude back to another Chicago team. You know, the Cubs lost for over 100 years, and yet people still went to games. So I might bring that idea up. Just because the Packers are ranked number 1 in attendance doesn't mean that their team is better than the Bears. Just because people show up, whether it's a winning year or a losing year, doesn't mean that they're better than the Bears. So notice, at no point do I ever say that the Bears are better than the Packers. All of this is me arguing against their evidence. And that's what you have to do. You have to argue against your evidence that you have in your claim, excuse me. Okay. Now, the second part is where you kind of get to counter what was just said. This is where you come in and say, okay, how can I explain why those arguments are wrong, weak, or flawed? Now, we're going to pull it back to the Bears-Packers debate, but obviously you're doing it for the GMOs. Don't get confused. Remember, this is an example, not a take this idea, put it for my answer. Okay, I'm challenging you guys. Now, let's take a look at this. Making the playoffs means you have a strong conference record and win a lot of games. Okay, the reality is, yes, this is true, but remember, we looked back at the previous paragraph and we talked about how a better team wins games. Okay, the Packers are better than the Bears because they win more games. And we have to remember that if you make the playoffs, it means you have a better conference record than the other teams, or you won the wild card game. Again, winning games. And if the Packers have been to more playoffs, it means they have won more games. So there it is. That's the argument against it. Okay. Next, the whole idea that 99 isn't that far away from 95. Well, winning games makes you the better team, period. It is what it is. If I had $99 or $95, which one do I want in my pocket? The 99. Yes, it's not that big a difference from 95, but it's still better. It's still more. So, though there is not a big difference between 99 wins versus 95 wins, the Packers are still ahead. Sorry. Some people are like, it's not that big a deal. You're right. Still more. Okay. This difference is still evidence that they are better than the Bears. Lastly, and this is the attendance one. Though the Packers are ranked number 1 in terms of attendance, okay, the Bears are ranked 10. And the reality is, whether you're the number 1 ranked team or whether you're the number 10 ranked team in terms of attendance, people like to show up for winning teams. That's why there's this big debate over, bandwagon fans and so on. The reality is the Packers have a higher attendance ranking than the Bears, so they have better fans than the Bears who want to see their team win or lose. Again, people want to watch winners, okay? It's that simple. All right, at this point, I have my answers. The thing that I'm probably going to do next is check my spelling, check my grammar, do all of that, make sure things are good. Okay, looks like I'm good. And then I'm going to go into my paragraph. And again, we're writing a paragraph, so I might need to add some transition stuff. So I added a transition sentence into the paragraph. The debate over the Packers being the better team does not come without doubt for the evidence. Again, transitioning between, hey, Packers are the better team. We're going to argue against that. And look, I literally copied and pasted what I had in the previous paragraph into here. So I've just said, hey, there's doubt about some of this evidence. Here's that doubt in that evidence, okay? And now I'm going to transition into arguing against this. Although these arguments bring into question the evidence, these arguments are still flawed. Hey, these are good arguments, but they're wrong. Here's why. Making the playoffs means, and again, I just copied and pasted what I had there. So, hey, there's some challenges to some evidence. Here are those challenges. Here, just so you know that those challenges are wrong, here's why. Boom. You've just argued the other side. You've shown that you understand the full conversation, the full debate, and you still have said to those naysayers like, hey, I understand there are maybe problems or reasons why the evidence isn't quite great, but here's what you got to remember, okay? At this point, you're done. If you have questions, reach out to me. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day.